Yes, sir. And then back, yellow shirt.
Washington was as fastidious and equivocated about becoming the first president general of the Society of Cincinnati, because he wondered about lending his prestige to the creation of this organization. Because there were rumors that we were trying to create European style militias.
He was excited and he immediately accepted the presidency. Oh, the question was, this has to do with the organization of your society, and Washington was immediately elected president. He was excited about it. He accepted it immediately. He saw no problems until Jefferson said to him, "You're out of your mind. This is a terrible thing to do." And of course, there was a lot of hubbub about the society, as you perhaps know. A major pamphlet was written by a South Carolinian, and it spread up. Samuel Adams came out saying, we're foisting an aristocracy on us, and so on. And Jefferson said, "You've got to do something." So Washington went to the organization, and he thought he got a promise that the hereditary element would be eliminated. And so he says, "All right, I'll remain for that reason." But he obviously, you got around that somehow, and he never fully. There was a real outcry against it because it did seem to be a movement, and there is a lot of evidence in the 1780s that the whole society is having second thoughts about the democratization, if you will, that occurred in 1776. The state constitutions were very democratic by the standards of the age, or by any standards. Annual elections, legislatures turning over 60%, multiplicity, mutability, injustice of legislation, which is what Madison outlines in his famous Vices essay of 1787 in preparation for the Constitution. The Constitution, in Madison's mind, becomes a way of dealing with these democratic elements. We're going to create a higher level government that's going to have a different caliber person, and is going to be less. And he wanted a veto power in his Virginia plan over all state legislation. He thought that was the heart of his proposal. Now if that had stayed in, the Congress would be hearing from the bills coming from 50 states that we have to okay before they became law. Well, wiser heads prevailed and told Mr. Madison that's impractical, so instead we get Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution, which forbids the states from doing certain things, the principal things that Federalists were objecting to. Printing paper money, for example. Can you imagine what it would be like today if the states could print their own money? That would take care of their debt problems. So there is a movement in the 80s that's a conservative kind of reaction to the revolution. And so in that context, the society seemed to be part of it. For conspiratorial-minded people, it seemed to be another step to undermine the earlier Republican Democratic Revolution. And there's a lot of talk of monarchy. We have to bring back monarchy. And of course, Washington is obviously thought of as being the first monarch. So it's in that context you have to understand the objections to the society. The society immediately became, how to put it, a lobbying group, another benevolent organization in a number of benevolent, and so it lost its fearfulness almost, I would say, almost immediately. But for a moment there in the 80s, it was scary to a lot of people. Now, this gentleman here in the yellow shirt, yeah, and then back there. Go ahead.
My question concerns your conversation with President French coming in. So my question is, what is Washington's position on the aiding and sedition laws?
Oh, yeah. Well, Washington, the question had to do with the Alien Sedition Acts of 1798. He's out of office. These are acts of John Adams. He certainly, I don't know if he ever made a statement about, he would not have been opposed to them. You have to go back and understand that there was a truly frightening period. Now, it's hard for us to take it seriously because we know what they predicted didn't happen. So you have to, this is the problem of history. You have to enter imaginatively into a world where the people don't know what we know. They don't know their future. So they were frightened, truly frightened. I think the Federalists were sincerely frightened that this was going to be a French takeover, French invasion, and the viciousness of the press was extraordinary. And so the Sedition Act, which is actually a liberal act, it liberalized the common law. Jefferson's opposition to it was based on Federalist grounds, not on the grounds of the common law of seditious libel remained at the state level. And when Jefferson becomes president, this is what's extraordinary, he sends out letters to the various Republican attorneys general in each of the states, go after those Federalist editors and use the common law of seditious libel. Well, the common law does not admit falseness in other words, the Sedition Act of 1788 required that that truth was a defense. If you said something true, then you could not be prosecuted under the Sedition Act. Under the common law of seditious libel, truth or falseness didn't matter. If it brought the public official into disrespect, that was sufficient grounds for prosecution. It's based on a hierarchical conception of public office in which the holder of the office social position is all that stands between him and chaos. There are no police forces to draw on. How do you maintain order? If you attack the character of public officials, then why would people obey the justice of the peace or the president? You can't, the authority was very fragile. You can't call out the police forces to enforce order. So you don't want to break down order. So in that sense, the Sedition Act of 1798 is liberal. Jefferson's opposition to it was based on Federalist grounds. The Alien Act certainly did extend. It's sort of the same problem we're having, when can you become a citizen? The Americans had welcomed immigrants, but too many Frenchmen were coming over with their highfalutin ideas about, destroying things in the minds of the Federalists. So they wanted to make it more difficult. They have 14 years to become a citizen. Before it had been 4 years or something like that. And so they lengthened, they expel a bunch of French. Well, they were going to expel them, but the French left anyhow before they could be forcibly expelled. And that's the Alien Sedition Act. It's always considered to be a taint on the Federalist Party. And John Adams never lived it down. I think it has to be put in context and understood, but it still was considered to be, as Jefferson said, this is a nightmare, and soon the reign of witches will be over, and when he takes over as president. But Washington would have supported it. He was, as I say, he was truly frightened. He comes out and puts on his sword once again, with very little of the reluctance that he had earlier. He's really scared. I mean, he's getting his information from his fellow Federalists, and he really does think there's going to be a French invasion. Adams had more doubts. He says, they're never going to come here. But he's not in control of his own government. He's still got Washington's cabinet. He didn't think he had the right to replace Washington's cabinet. And it's only when they really are plotting behind his back in desperation at the end that he fires them. And then he does, as you perhaps know, the most courageous act of his life, he sends an agent over to, there'd been the XYZ affair where the French, Talleyrand and so on, had asked for bribes and it was refused to admit the delegates. Adams takes another chance and sends a delegation over, and he, with Napoleon, reaches an accommodation that ends the quasi-war that had been going on between France and the United States. But unfortunately, the news of this comes after the election, and Adams loses the election to Jefferson. But Washington certainly supported the Alien Sedition Acts. Now,